And while we're exchanging, I'm not sure everybody knows who the steering committee members are. Could you guys raise your hands? I think you guys deserve a round of applause about what you've done. Zane and I are going to be presenting on GWT development in the cloud. Obviously, web apps reside and are distributed in the cloud, but we're going to be looking more at the development operations and infrastructure that are associated with that.
Do you want to drive this?
Sure. So Navigo's been around for 18 years, and we've been strong advocates and contributors to open source projects. We've worked with GWT since 2007, and Zane and I have been working together for the last 5 years on various GWT projects.
Yes, I'm Zane Rockenbaugh. As David said, worked on various GWT projects. So I've always done web applications. Before that, I did a number of banking and finance applications. Started with Perl, with CGI, and did LAMP stacks. Done a lot of different frameworks and technologies, and GWT is the latest.
So ultimately, when we're approaching projects as a software engineering firm, we have to consider who the team members are going to be initially, but also plan for the future and how they might be distributed within the same office or down the street or greater distances, of course. So our goal certainly is to achieve flexible team membership and be able to manage that team in a flexible way. The resources that we're going to be implementing for that stack to support the stack that we've chosen in our architecture as well needs to be flexible, and the overall infrastructure and the infrastructure as a service needs to be flexible as well. I'm curious, just out of the group, who is using Google App Engine primarily for their GWT apps? And how about AWS, Amazon? Linode? Any, how about other? And ultimately, are those just co-located servers, or any other vendors, such as the beta version of Red Hat's OpenShift? No.
Yeah, that's right, OpenShift.
I gave you a plug.
That's right.
Some of the challenges around those goals exist to provide flexible dev environments, of course, to support those teams, the flexible utilization so that you're not just burning clock time, CPU time on the systems that you've purchased. And then often these vendors, AWS, Google App Engine, etc., have unique services that lock you into them as a vendor. And portability is an important thing if you can achieve it. So we try to achieve that with our projects as well. With regard to the dev environments being inconsistent, or a challenge with that, being that there's inconsistencies, as you all know, that if you're working on a team that doesn't have controlled hardware and distributing laptops or workstations to your developers, you need to define a way to meet that challenge of inconsistent IDEs and stacks in general for the debugs. The other issue is being able to not transfer knowledge from team member to team member as the maturity and leaders emerge from a team or are defined, but also as you bring new resources on or others are offloaded from the team that you want to capture that information before they depart. And for those that have used Amazon, I think that you would, in AWS, you would have experienced cost overruns. You basically bring up a server at the end of the month, you've paid for a lot of what you don't need, and there's a cost overrun issue with that as well. with the challenges that we have around GWT and long compilation times, the ability to stand up a server solely for the purpose of that compilation, get continuous integration running, and then bring that server down after the compilation is another way that you could automate that, which out of the box, these services don't provide that automation. Which leads to the infrastructure as well, with the systems running without need and lack of automation again, and as I mentioned, the vendor lock-in. Is anybody here currently locked into a infrastructure as a service vendor with their GWT app?
Yeah, I use this.
And is that App Engine? Yeah, that would make sense as your employer.
No.
So for the solutions to these problems and challenges, we've got ways that we've addressed these over the past 18 years, and then specifically in the past, 7 with GWT, and the last 5 with Zane, in regards to the flexible teams optimally being achieved, as we continue daily to struggle to refine this process and tune it.
Yeah. So, process isn't a particular process, but just that you have something defined, because part of the idea with the flexible team is you want to be able to pick up people, slot them in, get them doing useful work as quickly as possible, and then so you can bring on new members, and that is useful to ramp up speed or to bring in specialists. So if you want to integrate a new technology, you've gotten too big and you need to integrate indexing in addition to the database, and you might not have that knowledge in-house, and so you want to bring on the expert, have them work in your process to stand up the new services in the stack, and get them working as quickly as possible. So if there's a clearly defined process, and that ties into documentation as well, especially if you're distributed, you're not sitting across from each other, so it's hard to ask questions. You can't ping people as you need. IM and email are great, but if I'm busy on something, I might not see that someone else is trying to get a hold of me, or if they are trying to get a hold of me, they might be interrupting something that I'm doing. So for the part of the process and the system which you just need to tell them, and there's a narrative, there's a story behind it, documentation is great, and that's hard for developers to do. I mean, we like to get in and implement the features, fix the bugs, and like we were talking about yesterday with GWT, the documentation, especially the high-level documentation, kind of gets left behind a lot. But in terms of managing a team, especially one that might be distributed and one that you want this kind of flexible aspect to, the documentation can be incredibly useful. And part of that documentation is to tell them what the process is. Get your tasks here. When you're done with the tasks, submit them this way. Manage your branches this way. All that kind of nuts and bolts stuff. Schedules, when you're working with people at different places, especially in different time zones. You have to define some overlap time. We're going to be on at the same time, so that if we do need to IM, this time we do it. A lot of methodologies have, your stand-up meeting, things like that. So, it's a pretty common idea. Communication, the idea there is just to, not only that you communicate, but to settle on, standard tools. So are you going to be communicating primarily through IM, through email, through an issue tracker, comments on the wiki? However it is for your process, it's just the idea that you let people know this is where you go to get information and to provide feedback into the process. All this, of course, you want to make it iterative as well, so that you can have the continual improvement, and just realistically, you're not going to be able to get it all right the first time and just dump it all out as a feat complete. And when I write up the process, I'm not going to know what you don't know necessarily. So, communication is just part of that feedback loop. mentors is just the idea of establishing, ask this person, this guy knows about this stuff, this guy knows about that stuff, who to talk to.
I was going to mention too about that we, throughout the years, have worked with a lot of people that have gone on to do interesting things and work with us in various capacities. And one way is that they're mentors to projects where they've already scaled a system that's comparable of a stack or an architecture, and they'll come back to a project that we're working on and provide some guidance on what they've recently done. And that mentor relationship is not very high touch, but it's more of a quick one-off feedback loop that we can provide to our team members who are previous team members from Navigo or clients that we've worked with. And I'm curious how the main driver of communication for your teams in development and even Google, are you guys using issue trackers like Jira? Does anybody use Jira in-house? Right. And how about an alternative to Jira with issue trackers? Is anybody using Pivotal as well? Right. Pivotal is the main driver. And does Google use Pivotal internally?
We do have an internal
We have our own
system.
proprietary one, but the public issue, there's also the Google Code issue tracker.
For direct project.
We have an internal one.
Yeah, so the red team used Pivotal for a while, probably about 2.5 years, and decided it wasn't providing sufficient value.
We found that the communication tools or the issue tracking offering from Atlassian, which is the maker of Jira, is now being more tightly coupled into continuous integration of the repository. They bought a Git repository called Bitbucket. And is anybody using Bitbucket internally?
But it was, doesn't Bitbucket use Mercurial?
It can, but there's Git support.
I think it was originally Mercurial.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, they added it.
And then the ability to integrate those now has come a long way. Just within the past 6 months, they've worked out a lot of the bugs. But I can let you get back as well to the IDEs, but that's interesting.
So the IDEs is probably one of the places where we had the most success earliest on, because nowadays it's pretty easy. And when we say IDEs here, it's not just IntelliJ or Eclipse, but the entire development environment. So your local stack, everything you need to run, your development instance of the program. And so what we've done is when we start a project, we create a developer VM image that has the database, Solar, Eclipse, everything on it, and then those get distributed, and you can run the IDE, or you can run the VM then on your laptop or workstation, whatever, and using the X protocols, all the windows and everything. So what I do is I log into the VM, and then the windows and everything just get exported to my workstation. So to me, it's seamless in terms of using my monitors and everything. It's exactly as if I'm working on my workstation, but I've got a sandboxed, pre-built environment that I can just run, and a new developer comes on, and instead of, I'm sure everyone's had the experience of 10 to 5 years ago, whenever you started someplace, it would be go build your dev environment would be how you'd spend your first couple of days, and you have a couple pages of badly written crib notes, and you encounter those same bugs. So with the prepackaged VM, you sidestep all that. So and there's that's super easy nowadays. So
Just curious as well if anybody does that themselves, basically distributing virtual machines for their dev environments for download and then running locally on whatever hardware the developer might have.
Because I don't know, because I think it's very hard work to make it up to date always. So I don't know how many people comes to your company. I think it's like, I don't know, every month or something. I don't think it's worth it.
Because of the operational
We always
requirements.
have to create a VM and update it.
And what did you use as an alternative? Just
Yeah,
policy?
yeah.
everything.
People have to
Download everything. Well, that's what you get. Because if you have the VM, you update the one image and then just download it again.
I think it is a viable strategy. I've known some companies that did this before. If you want to get somebody up and and running really quickly. I've seen it done at like code labs and workshops where you're running a conference and you want like 30 students basically to basically get up and running really quickly. So you basically deploy, already warmed up, instances that have the ID already open with the code, exactly in the state that the teacher wants it to be in when they start it. So everyone's on the same page. Because otherwise, if you just like say install Eclipse on 30 machines, the 30 people are going to open up Eclipse differently. They're going to not configure the project correctly. And they're all going to be in a different state before we start talking.
And that was for the purpose of training?
Training, yeah.
Yeah.
But I've used it once or twice, basically just to like move stuff between two of my machines, like one at home and one at work, where it's out. Not just for I'd move an instance around, just because of.
What OS do you find works well for that then? That works across the board and lets you actually browser test?
I've done it on a number of different projects with different Linux distros, and it's always been a Linux distro that I've used it on, but we've used it with CentOS, and I use OpenSUSE.
So do you have the canned IE distro setups inside of there then, or VMs in the VMs? Do you have canned IE setups that way you can verify that the application behaves in the various browsers?
Yeah, we've done that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think our testing infrastructure doesn't require that as much. With our clients as well being a lot of enterprises, we do generally now start with Eclipse in the past few years, the baseline for our developer testing. And then the variations come from that QA cycle that's independent, which helps having to try to run an AE.
Well, sure, for the test, but to verify and fix.
Oh, for verification and fix.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point. I don't, have we addressed that?
Well, we have used VMs to run Windows instances with the various IEs on a local basis, and then with testing as a service type infrastructure, you can also farm it out there. So we've done it both ways with that.
But one thing that we found using Chrome as the baseline with GWT is the idiosyncrasies from our experience on IE, of course, are the biggest nightmare, but it is something that the quality of our QA engineers can provide enough feedback in that debug loop that we're not having to require necessarily a local IE. That's our own experience, but I think that probably varies by web app. Or
typically, the developers don't have like IE all the time available, but if a bug is reported, then we'll say, go download this VM that can run the IE, and then you can use it locally in your loop, and then when they're done with that bug, they'll delete off the Windows VM. And Windows does, it expired, but I think they renewed it. They actually provide images for IE back to 6, so you can download from Microsoft 6, 7, 8, and 9 VMs.
yeah, we've done that for sure a lot as to the testing environments too. Some of that's evolving now with automated testing, but for the manual testing, there's a good book called How Does Google Test Its Software? I'm loosely translating that title.
Yeah, I think the guy who wrote that went to Microsoft.
Yeah.
And then wrote a scaling attack. Wow.
But it was a lessons learned and not necessarily pure process description, but I thought it was a good book on testing in general.
There was
I also find too that if you have multiple projects going on, the VMs make nice
all of that
sandboxes.
one.
So you don't have to worry about project A conflicting with project B on the workstation because they're each on their own, instance.
So we were talking about pre-configured development environments. This is more on the server side, and being able to spawn pre-configured services that specifically, or most recently, I think we've been able to optimize this within Amazon's Web Services. And you can speak to that if you like.
Yeah, so within the Amazon environment, they have an idea of an environment which is, in number of machines using in number of services and wired together in a certain way. And it's, there's a little bit to be desired, but once you get it working, it's actually pretty nice. So we have it set up now where we have the integration environment, our testing environment, our production environment, basically running all on the same configuration. And then between the three, you can kind of just turn up dials on the resources. So the integration environment and the testing environment are micro instances, and the production environment is a larger instance, so it has a little more resources. And if we needed to stand up something for a demo purpose or such, it's pretty easy just to say, start a new environment, use this configuration, and then you select the URL that you want, and it goes out and it kind of sets up all the pieces for you, and then you're up and running. So it's easy to take those environments up and down quite quickly. One thing we haven't done is, for instance, like the integration environment still runs continuously, but it doesn't really need to. In theory, it could spin up more or less in the morning and then spin down in the evening. And so we're going to look into that. Yeah. Well, the test environment is on the CI, and the CI environment is actually entirely automated now. So for us, it's an event-driven environment, although this would work with TikTok. So whenever we make a commit that gets merged to the master branch, then Bamboo notices that, and it goes out and it spins up the pre-configured environment, checks out all the code, does the build, runs the test, makes the report, and then takes it back down again. Or actually, before it goes down, it looks to see if maybe another commit's been made. It's smart about being management. And so in terms of managing the budget, that's great, because now you can spin up a larger instance so that your builds happen faster and your tests happen faster, but you're paying less for them because they're only running, an hour out of the day, however long it is, depending on the number of commits. And
Anybody using Bamboo?
We used to.
No more.
yeah.
We used hosted though.
Bamboo's the continuous integration offering from Atlassian.
The hosted has recently got a bit better, and so we were using our non-hosted, and we just recently moved over to the hosted, which works with that kind of flexible, they call it elastic Bamboo, pretty
All
well.
that was beautiful for us, but 4 builds out of 10, it would just fail to report back.
Yeah.
So eventually we just gave up because 3 months of that, we just said, all right,
Interesting.
I can do Jenkins manually better than I can do this.
Yeah.
So we did.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think a lot of improvements have been. How long ago was that?
That was almost a year actually.
Yeah, I think within as I mentioned, the last 6 months, they've tightened their game up, as well as the integration between these various services.
It's been very consistent for us recently.
Yeah.
And then the on-demand scaling is, another nice thing. So, you can go in and you can turn up your resource dials manually, but you can also, if the cloud provider has the right kind of tools, you can say, when so many users, so much demand on the machine, CPU gets so high, then it just starts spinning up other instances, and then if the app supports it, then it just scales up and down automatically so that you don't have user frustration, or you minimize user frustration, but you also kind of keep your cost, tracking as, minimal as possible as well.
Those pre-configured environments come into play here too, because once they're configured, then they're scaling or being spawned based on the traffic, and then the load balancer is managing the distribution. I know App Engine is providing a lot of that, but it doesn't give you the customized stack as AWS does with an Elastic Beanstalk, and then integrating with databases, SQL is easy. SQL-based.
Yeah, and so our environment that we're dealing with there is a app server that runs on on an instance. Then we connect to an RDS database as a service for the SQL, which is where the canonical data lives. And then we run Solar for index and search data. And then that runs on its own instance, which is an image provided by Bitnami. And then so the environments, each environment, stands up those components on its own, and then they scale as they need to. And it's fairly well automated now, so we're achieving a lot of what we want to achieve in terms of keeping the experience good for users, but minimizing cost for the client. So within the infrastructure, wars have been specified for a long time, so those are highly portable, and there's not really a problem. You can use whatever flavor of OS you like to run, your Java. SQL is pretty nice as long as you stay away from extensions. In theory, you could move from Postgres to MySQL to Oracle, and Amazon actually offers a couple choices in that. The No-SQL portability is where we do get a little lock-in. In theory, it's the same kind of structure in the data, so we would like to see something that would allow us to take a Mongo. So with SQL, we can dump from MySQL and load into Postgres, and that's okay. With NoSQL, there's not really the same flexibility necessary to be able to dump from Mongo and load into Solr or Memcache or all the other things. So there we do get a little bit more lock into the tool.
Anybody tried to migrate from Google App Engine? Or migrate? How about migrate to?
Well, I'll let you guys in on a little secret that we're announcing at Google I/O this week. You'll be able to run App Engine apps on OpenShift, which we're launching this week. So
Because currently you're on AWS only, right, with OpenShift.
No, like you'll literally just be able to take an App Engine app and move it onto OpenShift, and it will run as is.
So you built like a version of the SDK
Yes.
there, or did you build like that
Yeah.
sort of open
The
open
they're-
stack?
They're actually at I/O. This like Red Hat and Google have been working together behind the scenes for this for a while. So it's actually a Google blessed thing. You guys actually helped us do it, which is pretty crazy.
That is pretty crazy.
Was the yours also support OpenStack as well?
Yeah. So migrate over.
I just read
Yeah, it connects to other data sources. I've asked a few of these, I think. We are curious, though, about what experiences you all have had with regards to scaling GWT applications. Google obviously has had tons of experience, and the GWT team internal has had to respond to those bug fixes
Yeah,
and observe.
one of the problems is once you start working on tools, you stop working on GWT apps yourself anymore. So I have a few little things running on App Engine, but I don't personally have to deal with that sort of thing.
This is kind of why we need a steering committee of the community, because like we're like the worst people to define the future APIs with 2.6.3.0 because we don't write very many apps anymore, except for like samples.
Yeah, from the team.
Yeah, I mean, within Google, lots of other people write apps, and they basically ask us to add stuff to GWT. But I mean, the actual team itself, like we basically don't really, know what's popular in terms of what people want in the API, unless we know it from internal users, but we don't know outside of Google what people actually care about. And so, like, and what Google tends to like or care about might not be the same thing that like you tend to like and care about. Like they have different priorities.
Yeah, I can say internally there's no demand to run on non-Google infrastructure. So it's like,
But that's even more of a, well, you've worked a lot on performance optimization or throughout the years with GWT, right? So some posting about that.
I mean, that's like a common thing. I mean, people like performance everywhere. But like a very particular thing, for example, is Google is very proto-focused, right? Protobuf, for like every one of our services uses Protobuf to communicate. I think only AdWords uses like RPC. Like pretty much people use Protobuf for everything. It's like the lingua franca of Google. And so if you were to ask Googlers to define their ideal serialization and RPC mechanism, they basically do it with protos, which is not what the rest of the world is used to do. And so that's the way it is. Like we standardized on protos a long time ago, and so everyone does protos.
Actually, that also changes the different projects
Right.
using
I know several companies like Oanda, the forex trading company. They use protobufs too, but they're not actually using it for performance reasons. They're using it because it lets them write in like 50 different languages inside and have a common way of communicating between different.
Well, there's that. The other thing is protobufs are forward compatible. They're not. You don't get as much version skew problems.
Yeah.
You can compose them.
That's why they're
Lots
using
of advantages.
Yeah, the version issue is the primary reasons where
You guys are using protos internally too.
All right, the profile of our client base is from startups and nonprofits to academic institutions that don't deal with a lot of scaling, but then on the enterprise side there is ultimately B2B scaling, and then to consumer, that's a smaller market of scale, but width and scaling, I think, is something I don't really, for performance, I don't see that much discussion out in the wild. Am I wrong on that? Or?
well, mostly the scaling you're talking about would be server side, not on the client anyway, so it's not really good specific.
Right. Good point.
I actually heard a lot of complaints in Germany that people complaining about requests for difference because it does have the use of reflection, and that's without integrating these servers and setters. So actually, servers really that they actually touched it to the control.
If I can share one experience at RBs, we built this application, kind of a social network for teenagers in Quebec City, and basically it has a couple of thousand users, and it's not maintained anymore, but it's hosted in that engine. You know, it's a ghost application, no one touches it anymore, but the data admins regularly push photos and galleries, and it's making heavy use of the data store and the Love Store API and images API. And basically, we deployed the application, and we didn't have to do any manual scaling. Just App Engine is really marketed, as doing automatic scaling, and this is
Sure.
really what it did. So it was pretty hassle-free on our side.
One problem that we encountered, but it wasn't with the application at all, it was with a game at EA actually, where they had this matchmaking server-side technology that they wanted to develop for one of their games, and they ended up because with a problem where there was too many requests and we couldn't serve them all, and they needed one entry point for them because they didn't want they wasn't able to parallelize all those kind of things because they were at first they had a problem because some people got matched with the same people that wasn't
Either race condition.
Yeah. Well, so they struggled with that problem was where the matchmaking they had like 100,000 requests at the same time. So it wasn't like this. We always think that Google App Engine is magic and that it was pre-made, but in some cases actually you have to think a little bit more to resolve the problem to be able to achieve that scale.
Especially if you have like impulse loads that just suddenly goes way up.
Yeah.
There's things you can do ahead of time to force it to scale up. Have more medians.
Yeah, one max.
And we find clients that are actually needing to scale, which often it's not the case, but those that really do have a trepidation of putting data into App Engine, and then if they want to get it out in the future, they're concerned that they won't be able to do that. So it's in part why we don't use that in those cases, but we certainly know the advantages of App Engine with regards to
I mean,
scale.
some of the examples, like moderator being used for Obama's accounts where I forget what load it was. There was an astronomical load. There were load glitches.
Yeah, I saw a presentation.
I recall it was over like 10,000 PPX. Those are something ridiculous.
Well, the last question, I guess, for everybody is whether or not you're primarily IMing between each other, or or if it's a email-based culture for your dev team still.
IRC.
Good to hear.
These guys
So there's a lot of Google talk amongst the Google's developers.
well, I would say at Google, the primary communication mechanism is email.
Yeah, email and mailing
Basically,
lists.
email at Google is a tsunami. Basically, you get constantly getting emails from everything.
It's your task list.
But IM is getting pretty common. I mean, when you need something really fast.
When you send when you send an email and the person has to respond, and then you go into
I mean, it's different.
Yeah, if you can respond in a few minutes, let's do IM.
We have an internal corporate mails, like an IRC server. It's actually not just used by engineers. It's used for everything. We have a crazy IRC culture. Like you can, there's like a hash mark finance like room, in the internal Red Hat IRC channel. You can basically get anything through IRC at Red Hat. You go to hash mark help desk and be like, my internet doesn't work.
That's an interesting one
I
for
think it's different
Quick, right?
tools for different tasks. Yeah, so for example, email is primarily information dissemination. I have something I want to send it out to a bunch of people. Docs for collaboration on something, whether it's a Dime doc or whatever.
For reference.
Hangouts if you need face-to-face talk. It's so much faster. Depending on what you're doing, either Google Talk or Hangouts. And then IRC is like, well, I need to ask a question from this group of people. I don't really know who should answer that. So I'll get on the ProdEng channel and ask them this question.
Yeah, if only there was a tool, kind of like something Google Wave that kind of did all of those things. that would be a pretty good solution.
At our meetings, we would give usage of Google Plus communities. So found it's a nice experience when you want about private communities.
Is that for outbound communication too, to the client? Internal team.
Sometimes we wire up a small community just for our client and make it private and make all the announcements that are relative to client right here. So they're given for the
But I think that the major communication tool is actually code reviews and comments. That's where we really communicate with other developers. When you have a distribution, for example, you don't always send email to those person, but actually when you interact with the code review itself, you're doing a communication with other developers. You're giving them your opinions. You're giving them valuable feedback on what they're actually doing. I think that as a developer, this is primary communication tools that you're using every day.
That's a good point. I think it's probably a good one to end on as far as time goes. Wanted to thank Google for hosting and as well Christian for inviting us. We've had a chance to work with ArcBees over the past year, and it's been a real pleasure to do so. We hope to have a chance to work with more of you here in the room in the future.